Welcome everyone to Neltharion's Lair. This dungeon is on the medium side of the difficulty through all the dungeons, but it does have some fairly punishing trash in terms of the amount of healing that's required to deal with it. So at the start of the dungeon we land in the water here. We've opted to take the left hand route through the water, so we can skip the scorpion and the little guys that come with them. So instead we have to deal with two of these rockback gnashers. The gnashers will simply attack the tank with a bone chomp ability, which is just a stacking dot. It's kind of moderate damage, so not too dangerous. The other ability they have is a stone gaze, and this is a long cast time ability that will stun a target for 6 seconds if successful. So make sure to interrupt this, as a 6-second stun is pretty bad. Further in here we meet these tar spitter lurkers. These guys are going to periodically submerge and just appear behind a random target. So if you have everyone group up a bit, you can stop them from moving too far, which helps a little on your efficiency. After they submerge, they'll cast this bile attack, which just hurts everything in front of them. Simple matter of moving out, as they won't move during this. Whenever one of these lurkers dies, it's going to explode into this sort of pool of bile on the ground. So if you're killing these one at a time, just make sure you continue to move around so you're not standing in this bile, as it deals pretty heavy damage. You'll see we're also pulling a few of these little Velshard crawlers. These guys just attack with a basic melee attack, but when they die, they leave sort of poisonous gas on the ground, so it's important to move from that. In this section here, we take the route through the water again, as we don't want to pull this big Velshard hulk in the middle, as they're extremely dangerous, and they have a piercing shards attack which does a ton of damage to the tank. So we opted just to take care of this rockback gnasher instead. It's a little bit more straightforward than the Velshard Hulk, so I do recommend that you also do it this way. There are some enemies on the bridge to our right here, however you can skip these by just jumping down the waterfall, but take care not to land on the rocks below, as this will kill you if you're not Pandaren for the just falling damage. So you can see I'm just gliding down here to our first boss, Rokmora, and after some brief RP, this guy will spring to life. The first mechanic to think about on Rokmora is the Blight Shard skitter as he spawns. As he takes damage, he's going to throw out these adds. I believe it's about 1 add for every 5% damage he takes, so he's going to be spawning a lot of them pretty frequently. These adds don't do very much, they'll just follow regular threat tables and deal some light melee damage, but when they die, they leave behind this green pool that we saw before. When Rokmora reaches a full mana bar, he's going to cast Shatter. It'll deal heavy damage to all players and knock them back, and it also destroys any of the Blight Shard skitters that are left in the room, so you don't really have to focus DPS on these, as the Shatter is going to kill them for you. After the Shatter, he's going to create this crystalline ground effect, and anyone who moves in this crystalline ground is going to take damage, but as the damage is taken, the size of the effect decreases. So eventually it disappears entirely, but when it's large you want to make sure you're not moving around any more than is absolutely necessary. One thing for the tank to be concerned of is this Razor Shards ability. He's going to deal heavy damage to any player standing in front of him. However, he won't move himself during this, so like the tank and all DPS can just get out of the way. He's not going to readjust his position, so you can safely avoid all of this damage. Just make sure he's being faced away from your ranged DPS, as given the nature of conal attacks, they'll have a bit less time to move away. So we jump into these barrels here to reach the next section. You'll get an extra button to throw a fish, however this is not really necessary unless you're trying to do the achievement, which involves smashing snails. So simply enjoy the ride along here and drop down into the next part of the dungeon. The first pack here can be skipped if you hug the right hand side, however given that we were doing Mythic Plus in this run, we opted just to kill them. It consists of a Rockbound Pelter and a Mightstone Breaker. The Pelter is just going to throw these jagged discs at random targets. They're really quite frustrating and they deal a lot of damage, so if you can stun these guys and focus them down, that's going to help a lot. They'll also periodically cast Retreat, and they'll just jump away, and they can jump into other trash and they can jump in really annoying locations. And unlike the trash in, say, Darkheart Thicket, you can't really control the jumping location too effectively. So yeah, these guys are really frustrating. They're one of the most annoying trash mobs in any dungeon. The Mightstone Breaker is going to cast an Avalanche ability. The Avalanche deals damage in front of the target, but it also causes rocks to fall from the sky, which target random players and inflict damage in the impact zone. So it's important that, particularly as melee DPS, you spread out for these, as you don't want multiple rocks coming down in the same area and just causing a lot of damage to individual people. The next pack we pull here is more Pelters and one additional Breaker. This is the ideal place to use AoE stuns if you have them, as you really want to stop these Pelters from jumping out of range. You'll notice the rocks dotted around this area. If you're getting pelted by the Pelters, by their jagged discs, you can just hide behind the rocks, and they can't fire without line of sight, so they'll be forced to run after you. It's a good way to get them to group up if you just have your entire group standing behind a rock, and as soon as the Pelters jump out of range, they'll be forced to just run back to you because they don't have line of sight. We didn't really do that in this video because we were a little bit uncoordinated. We weren't using voice or anything here, so you don't really see any demonstration of that tactic, but it's something to consider if you're doing this yourself, say on a high Mythic Plus level where they really start to hurt. There's packs on the left hand and the right hand side of this room, however you only need to deal with the left hand pack. You're introduced to this new enemy, the Blightshard Shaper, along with the Vileshard Hulk that we skipped earlier. The Shaper is just going to cast Stone Bolt, you can interrupt that, and he'll put down this petrifying totem. However, this mechanic is pretty negligible, as you can simply just move out of the totem and it will do nothing. It's worth interrupting the Stone Bolts as much as possible, as they're going to deal damage to random party members. The real problem here is the Vileshard Hulk. He'll do a small knockback on the tank, however the dangerous ability are these shards he spits out. He'll do one shard attack, and then he'll stop for a second and do another shard attack. Both of these deal incredibly heavy damage, and they leave a heavy dot on any targets hit. So it's very important for tanks to use cooldowns on these guys, and for all your DPS and healer to make sure that they're not in front of these at any cost. The next boss's room is just filled with various patrols here, consisting of Breakers, Pelters, more Shapers, another Vileshard Hulk. Really, you've dealt with all of these before. The only difficult pack is the one that has 2 of the Pelters in it. There is sometimes a situation where they can jump backwards and land on the boss, which pulls the boss. So you have to take extra care, perhaps just to pull these guys back a little bit. Even if it means running back down the way you came, it's better to spend that extra 5 to 10 seconds than it is to accidentally pull the boss with all the trash still alive. So if you manage that pack properly, you shouldn't have too much problems. You don't necessarily have to kill everything in this room, however I do believe it's best to, as sometimes the boss can move around a lot, and particularly in his Urns phase, you want all the extra room. So we approach the second boss here, Ularogg Cragshaper. This guy only has a few mechanics, but it's important to deal with them properly. The first thing for tanks to watch out for is this Sunder attack. It's a very, very fast cast time, about 0.1 of a second, where he's just going to smash the tank for high damage, so it's important to watch the cooldown on this and just react with the defensive appropriately. The next ability are these Bellowing Idols. They are going to cause the avalanches from the sky, similar to the Breakers we saw earlier. Simply spread out and kill these. Another ability this boss does is the Strike of the Mountain. He's going to mark a random ranged player and summon 4 hands around them, and the hands are directly in front and behind of you and directly to your left and right. After a few seconds these hands will just smash together, which usually kills the player inside. It's important that you strafe out of these hands, going diagonally. If you try and go to your left or right or directly ahead, you'll just run into one of the hands, and even if the hand's not moving, it'll still hurt you. The main difficult mechanic here is this Stance of the Mountain. Ularogg's going to just disappear into the grounds and become one of these idols that we saw previously, along with 4 extra idols around him for 5 total. And these 5 idols are going to shift around the room and change locations. You have to keep an eye on the middle one, the one that's actually Ularogg, and when they've stopped shifting locations you have to kill the one that's him as soon as possible. If you waste time killing ones that aren't the correct one, you're going to take a lot of damage from this falling debris from the sky, which works very similar to the Breaker enemies that did the avalanche previously. So keep an eye on the correct target, mark a skull for your group, and try and spread out a bit to avoid the debris damage. If you get the right one, you can pretty quickly end this phase just by nuking it down and revealing Ularogg. He's going to do this dance at the mountain every time he reaches 100 energy, so he may do this perhaps 2 times before you kill him, as he tends to do the first one pretty quickly, but it's just repetition at this point. Kill the idols when he spawns them, and keep an eye on which one is him when he shifts them around. Move out of the hands, use defensive on the Sunder. There's not really any enrage of sorts here, so just repeat, and then you'll do okay. And down the path here, you'll notice a group on the right. However, you can skip these just by jumping on top of this rock here and moving down the path. If you try and go around the rock, you'll sometimes still pull them, or if anyone in your group has pets, the pets will try and go around and the pets will also pull. So if you do have a pet, just dismiss it here. In the next area, we encounter this group of a Stoneclaw Grubmaster and the Tarsplitter Lurker. The Grubmaster is going to affect players with this Leech debuff, which deals moderate damage over time. And he's also going to cast this Worm Call, where he summons a little grub at a random location. And this grub will attempt to cast Metamorphosis. If it manages to cast this, it becomes another worm that sort of bursts out of the ground and deals damage to anyone close by. However, you just want to stun the grub and kill it quickly to stop it from transforming. The next group is another Grubmaster with the Blightshard Shaper. I like to kill the Shaper first just to stop the Stone Bolt damage. However, it's important to switch target when the grub comes. You'll see here we didn't quite do that, so we got the grabber out of the ground. I'm just standing in the pool here because I've got a cooldown up, I can take the damage, and I want to kill this guy quickly. However, if you're a very heavy melee group, you can see how punishing that is, because melee players can't actually hit this guy without taking lots of damage. Down the path here I pulled 2 groups. We have a Grubmaster, and we have a bunch of these small worms to AoE, along with 1 extra Lurker. Same rules apply. As soon as the worm spawns, you want to nuke that down with stuns and just heavy damage, and get out of the way for the Lurker's Bile, as we did in the very first section of the dungeon. So we're at the next boss, Naraxas, and in my opinion this is the hardest boss of the dungeon. However, with some proper healing and melee who pay attention, you'll usually do okay. Now, the main mechanic in this fight are the minions that Naraxas is going to call. They will jump down from the stands behind you and to the right, and they'll attempt to run towards the boss. If they reach the boss, then they will attempt to cast a Fanatic's Sacrifice ability, where the boss devours them and gains plus 50% damage, and this stacks, so there's an achievement on this guy to get 6 stacks and still kill the boss. And having done this, I can say these stacks are very, very rough. Once you start getting like past even 2 stacks, the damage becomes very, very intense. So make sure to kill these adds quickly, ranged DPS and melee DPS. 2 more abilities this guy spams through the fight are the Rancid Maw for the first one, which just sort of gives these piles of bile around the room. These are mostly targeted at melee DPS, so you just want to sort of spread out in melee range, keep out of the pools. It's also going to apply a poison effect. However, this poison effect only lasts maybe 2 or 3 seconds. It is dispellable, but I'd say with such a short duration it's probably not worthwhile. The next ability, this Rancid Maw, is leaving these pools that primarily target ranged DPS, and they slow the movement of anyone inside them. You can use these pools to slow down the adds, however it's a little difficult to sort of position them appropriately. The main use for these pools is when the boss reaches 100 energy. She's going to try and cast a spiked tongue on the tank, and she'll try and draw the tank towards her and devour the tank if the cast manages to complete with the tank nearby. So you want to get away as the tank, and you want to stand in one of these green pools, as it slows your speed, which means you get pulled much less quickly. You can easily run against it with the movement reduction from the pool. However, if you don't use the pool, you'll need multiple movement speed increases to escape this. If she does manage to devour you, it's very heavy damage, and she also gains a 50% stack, so avoid this at all costs. If your DPS can spread out and avoid all of the toxic wretch damage, usually you're okay, but once she starts gaining stacks, that's when it becomes a problem, because melee DPS can find themselves dying instantly to this toxic. Now in the next section there's a lot of stuff you can skip here. Again, because we were on Mythic Plus, we chose not to. The first pack here is a Breaker, which we've seen before. He'll just do the Avalanche ability we saw previously. Don't be in front of him and spread out. The other enemy here is the Understone Demolisher. He is going to cast Charskin and transform into this big molten giant, which fixates on a random player and just chases him around. So it's a good idea to stun him if he fixates, and just make sure he doesn't reach whoever he's chasing. The next group here introduces these new enemies, these Trappers. Now these are very like the Pelters, they'll just spam this jagged disc attack. However, they also have an ability called Bound, which is about a 3-second cast time and will stun the target. So it's very important to assign interrupts to these, as a stunned tank is usually a dead tank. Next enemy are these Ember Husk Dominators, and these guys are very tough. They have a little guy riding on top who just throws out crystal spikes at players randomly. These deal a lot of damage and are not avoidable in any way as far as we can tell. If you've found a better way to deal with these, then perhaps leave something in the comments to indicate it. But as far as I can tell, these guys are just very, very healing intensive. You can see even on Mythic Plus 2, we're dipping so low. I'm having to do some support heals with Light of the Protector, and overall it's just a lot of damage. They're also going to cast a swipe in front of them. However, the swipe is pretty trivial, just make sure you're not in front. If you are, you're probably going to die because the crystal spike damage along with the swipes is just really bad news. Inside the boss's room are 2 of these packs, each with another Ember Husk Dominator and one of the Trappers. I think killing the Trapper first is a good idea because the jagged disc damage is pretty high, and focusing him lets you interrupt his bound. After he's dealt with, you can deal with the Dominator. One thing I've noticed about Dominators is they're stunnable, however it doesn't actually seem to do anything. They can still cast their swipe while stunned, and the guy on top still casts Crystal Spike while stunned as well. So don't use your stuns on these guys, save them for the Trappers if anything. So we're at the final boss here, Dargrul, and if you quested through High Mountain you've probably seen a lot of this guy, and this is where we finally get to kill him. One thing to consider on this fight is every time the boss moves, he's going to deal party-wide fire damage, so minimise movement of the boss as much as possible. He has 2 abilities that will damage the tank. The first one is called Landslide, which just causes rocks to erupt on the ground in a straight line in front of him. Simple matter of nobody should be in front besides the tank. It'll deal a light knockback, however you can just simply run back into range as it doesn't knock you very far. The second and more dangerous ability is his Molten Crash, and if this hits you without an active mitigation effect up, you're going to take a lot of damage and you're going to be knocked very far, which will just cause the boss to sprint across the room and deal massive damage to everyone. It's imperative that you have an active mitigation effect up when this guy does his ability, or bad things happen, you get knocked really far. It's just overall very bad news. Now, at the start of the fight, he is going to cast Magma Sculptor, which summons a Molten Charskin ad. And this ad is much like the Demolishers we saw previously. They'll just fixate people, and they'll chase them around. You can stun these and just nuke them down. There is a mechanic where if you kite them through these crystals on the ground, they'll be stunned and take extra damage. However, in my experience, it's just not necessary to do this. Just stun it in melee range and focus it down and it dies easily. Now the crystals I mentioned just previously, what they are is the boss targets a random player with a crystal spike, and just a spike erupts from the ground. You just want to get out of the way, and it leaves these sort of permanent fixtures here, which you can use to hide behind for this Magma Wave ability. So when he reaches 100 energy, he'll start casting Magma Wave, dealing constant damage, and then at the end of the cast, he'll deal one final big slam of damage, which usually kills anyone who's not hiding. So it's important to keep an eye on this guy's mana bar. If you see him approaching 100, just run away, get behind the crystals. One thing for tanks to note is if you point the boss towards the crystals and he landslides on a crystal, he'll destroy the crystal. So if you mess this up too much, you'll find yourself with no crystals to hide behind. And then Magma Wave just wipes your party, there's nothing you can do. So make sure you're facing him in an appropriate direction. And if everyone just hides from Magma Wave, there's not really too much of a problem on this boss. I think he's a little bit easier than Naraxas, it's just a matter of realising Magma Wave is coming and getting out of the way. Okay, so thanks for watching this guide to Neltharion's Lair. Overall, I'd say as a tank, this is pretty easy dungeon to tank, but it's kind of stressful on the healer because there's so much random party damage, and thus far I haven't really found any good way to deal with it. So it's important that DPS use their own personal cooldowns, their own personal heals, maybe healing tonics and potions, and just have a powerful healer to help you through this. Otherwise, sort of middle difficulty, really the healing is the only problem here, so as long as you have that covered you should do fine. Thanks for watching and good luck.